You want your brand to be visible and top of mind. If you want to get to that goal, you have to start at the beginning line. And I think everyone wants to just fast forward to the end. And that's just part of human nature, but we need to acknowledge that and figure out a better strategy. Take small incremental steps. And that's what in the Alchemy of the Growth, they talk about the staircase to growth and really testing and learning. And that's a big pillar of mine, is testing and learning. Take a part where you want to test. If you want to start to do more sponsor brands, start to, hey, what are the 3 ASINs I really want to maximize the digital shelf and share a voice, and I want to put these in sponsor brand ads, and then I want to do sponsor brand video. What was the click-through rate between the two? What was the conversion? When I'm thinking about performance, if click-through rate and click are in general, what I'm trying to gauge what customers are interested in. And then in terms of the conversion, I'm looking at conversion rate, and then for new customers, I'm looking at the new to brand sales percentage.
Well, welcome back. We have a treat today. This is going to be a really fun one because we have David Khoshpasand. He is the Amazon Performance Marketing Manager at Hasbro. So definitely dealing with a lot of complex and moving parts. I had a conversation on LinkedIn, which is a really great platform. If you're not following David, you should. We'll definitely link him down below. But over the topic of not only looking at ROAS to determine your ad strategy or what you should be doing. And I was telling David right before we hit record, I always love talking to people who manage large and complex accounts, because the amount of goals and strategies that you have to juggle, because one product's doing one thing and another product's doing another thing, but yet how do you make sense of it all, because you still got some top line account level goals. So this is really going to be an interesting conversation. I'm so excited, and thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, it was my pleasure. It was definitely initiated by a comment you made somewhere. We got connected and started talking on this topic. I don't honestly know.
It exchanged through LinkedIn, and I've been reading your content for quite some time, and always, enjoy the insights that you provide on an ongoing basis. So I know that you're incredibly busy. So today, even chatting with me is a pleasure. So thank you, and hopefully we can continue to dive into some insights we can share, because Amazon's always evolving and changing. So never can lose sight of a good conversation around performance and how to look at strategy in general.
Yeah, absolutely. You're like you said, it's definitely getting more complex. It's also getting more complex because it's getting more competitive. So definitely, I think an interesting and very pertinent topic for a lot of Amazon sellers or brands, looking at it from a perspective of profitability, which in some case, ROAS, which I'm sure that's something we'll get into, and how ad profitability doesn't always equate to account level profitability. There's definitely ways that you should be looking at things on a maybe a little bit more sophisticated level. But as it becomes more competitive, there's just less room for errors is what we've found. You definitely have to dig in and get more sophisticated with your ad strategy, for sure.
Yeah, and the way I really try to think about things is Jonah Berger wrote a book called Magic Words, and the one part I really enjoyed was he said, use the word could instead of should. So when I think about media spend in general, we should always be approaching how could we be doing things, because there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's about using divergent thinking and really think about the possibility for innovation and a number of opportunities to tackle a specific problem. And that's how I view media in general. I think with the ROAS and profitability, the problems that we're starting to see is actually historically happen in economics. Back in the day with economics, it was very mathematical driven, and performance marketing in general has been that, and there's definitely a lot of value to seeing things from a quantitative perspective. But we always need to remember that economics evolved with behavioral economics, and Dan Kahneman he was a psychologist, but yet he won a Nobel Prize for economics because he understood the key input is humans, right? There's research to be understood about how people behave and how that should be integrated into your goal setting in general. And definitely profitability and ROAS is an important topic for businesses because it has to work for the business and the customer and that value exchange. But the way I really look at it is, what dangers could we be facing if we only primarily focus on ROAS?
Yeah, so the whole pros and cons, give and take.
Absolutely. And how I approach it is thinking about, because I have previous history in consumer behavior research, James Herman wrote a really compelling white paper, now it's a book, thinking about brand as future demand. And what happens if we put all our focus on converting existing demand? What about the future demand that's happening 3 years from now? And from a consumer behavior perspective, what I've found is when you do take the effort to do upper funnel brand marketing, it creates this top of mind confirmation bias. And then when you go to Amazon, you see the product, you're familiar with it. We prefer things that are familiar. So the conversion rate is a lot stronger, even when you're looking at like AMC data and you look at number of exposures, and you can actually see that when Amazon's talked about, the number of exposures can lead to increased trust and conversion rate altogether. You can see how this research just isn't something nice to read. It actually really works. And through performance marketing is like, how can we tie in the brand element and hold hands with to say like, we're not just about clicks and conversion. We're also should be thinking about that upper funnel and how we're branding, and then ultimately, how does that affect our ROAS target, our overall goals for the account?
I like that, because I think a lot of, for better or worse, especially smaller brands or brands that have only started out on the Amazon platform, which is a great way to get started quickly and growing a brand. So I see that there's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of them have been very like ROAS driven, or like you said, very performance driven, very bottom of the funnel, very what is my performance right now, and maybe it's unfamiliar territory, or in some ways there's sort of an inherent distrust as the landscape gets a little bit more competitive, prices increase, this whole idea of brand awareness and more awareness plays, which are not always so ROI focused or ROAS focused. If that's been kind of where we're always just looking at the short term, what's happening now, I think it can be kind of difficult for some brands who are just unfamiliar with it to be comfortable kind of running those sort of ad types or strategies. I'd love to touch on when you said kind of looking at the broader picture and not just what's happening today, but like you said, looking at your future and brand future. How are you navigating that while still wanting to, again, have some sort of profitability in the business, because you need to be able to continue to run your brand, but then also looking at the future of what your brand could be?
Yes, ultimately, first, and I know you talk about it a lot and do an excellent job about thinking about tacos. And when we're looking at the tacos, and for me, it's personally thinking about, okay, if this represents X% of my total sales, what do I want to accomplish with this media, right? Yes, the first answer go to is I want to drive sales growth. Okay, well, if we want to drive sales growth, what needs to take place? And is the media spend the best version directly tied to this lowest bit of the funnel? Roger Martin from the Harvard Business Review, I told you I've had some notes ready.
Yes.
So, yeah.
You definitely came prepared.
I was reading this. I actually really like the way he framed this. He says, when we're thinking about strategy, which is like a plan to deliver value, ask yourself these questions, and I relate this to the tacos. Where are we choosing to play? How are we choosing to play? What capabilities do we need in place, and what management systems do we need to have? Where we're choosing to play and how. So for me, I love the book Alchemy of Growth that talks about our core business, the emerging business, and then the seed growth. But for media in general, I want to set goals to say, how can I help the core business and the ASINs that we have going right now? I'll also be thinking about new products that are emerging. And then also, how can I be constantly testing and learning that where if we find a nugget that actually is really strong, how can we replicate that business at scale? To me, I always have multiple goals that are ascending up into the sales growth, and will it meet this profitability level that we need to attain it? For me, it's almost like a DJ or a software or sound engineer, like mixing the right volumes at each point to make sure that it comes through crystal clear. Like when you get in that car and you're listening to the song, it sounds so nicely mixed. And that's how we should be thinking about like our advertising in terms of what's the optimal spin mix between, sponsor products, sponsor brands, whether we're doing DSP or sponsor display, and how does that fit into our goals? Because to your point, you were like, hey, look, we could be wanting to go after volume, or this year we really want to be focused on efficiency. Well, if we're focused on efficiency and that's the goal, right? Well, then where are we choosing to play? Which is like going to be like lower funnel and how we're going to. But ultimately, I'm very future oriented, and I'm always thinking about long term. That's why I'm very strategic minded. I don't want to focus on just today, because I feel like if you do that, you're setting yourself up for danger. Because based on the research, we knew that customers are going to have that brand familiarity and confirmation bias. ROAS. And eventually, what James Herman pointed out is your efficiency and conversions will actually dip over time because people are not familiar with your brand as much. They're not as top of mind. Unless you have 30,000 reviews, maybe you'll have a chance, but always thinking about investing for the future.
Yeah, that's such a good point because I agree with you. And that was, I think, one of the points we connected on over this topic was if all we're looking at is ROAS or just how our ads are performing, which again, neither of us are saying throw out those those metrics. We're saying look at them in context. The context is, and actually I've been working on writing some newsletters and some other content like around this concept of how do you balance trying to become profitable without losing market share. And one of the, I'm trying to get it in a way that's going to make sense to the readers, but almost asking yourself clarifying questions on how important is visibility on the search page to my brand growth. And if that question is, well, this is very important, then you probably need to be slightly less ROI conscious because like you were talking about thinking about long-term investments or things that are really going to help your brand. That's a piece that's super important. And oftentimes if we pull back on those things because we want better ROAS, you're going to end up long-term hurting your brand versus things that maybe this isn't as an important search page to me. Maybe you can save your ad dollars like you were talking about running different strategies and balancing and figuring out what is my perfect volume levels for each of these things. It's definitely an ongoing dynamic, but I find if you kind of, like you said, look at it through the lens of long-term goals and impact of things on those goals, it helps you at least get closer to where those dials need to be.
100%. And brand metrics in the ad console is very illuminating. For instance, it'll show you, and they're doing a really good job. I saw lately they just added to where you can see bar charts for your each, which is really cool. I'm a very visual person, so seeing that, I was like, oh my God, yes. And it shows you like a line of where the previous period performance was. And you can really, like, from a quick glance, see in your funnel, where am I doing well? Where are the opportunities? Do I really have the brand awareness that I think that I may have, or do I need to focus more? And that's what helps some of those questions. Is your brand awareness and search volume dropping over time, or is it increasing? And then how is that consideration growing, and what's happening with that bottom of the funnel with your total purchasers? Another good metric to think about as we're on that subject is looking at the annualized value. So when they show the brand customers and even that like top tier of the distribution curve of your like the highest fans for your product, right? If you see that they have $100 annualized value and your cost per acquisition through ads is like $2 and you're judging your decisions based on a $20 ASP average selling price product, you know that there's more that you could be getting more aggressive in terms of what your ROAS goal is. Because if you get someone in the funnel and the average person's spending $100 and you're assuming that they're only spending this one-time transaction, then it's very clear that, hey, maybe I should set my ROAS from 3 to 1 and get more people into my product and have them experience it, because 70% of them may end up spending $100. There's room to be left on the table, or that, how that saying goes. But brand metrics is super insightful in that type of way, and can glean some insights into how to think about business, even from small all the way up to the corporate level. Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely a great point. Like you were talking about the annualized value. I think a lot of other listeners might be more familiar with saying like lifetime value. There's a lot of concepts that it seems like we keep bringing to Amazon ads that are business concepts or marketing concepts that have been around for a really long while. I don't know if it's because that maybe the Amazon selling platform is so new, a lot of people like for a really good reason, and they've also come up with some insane strategies because of it. We've been very scrappy. Like you said, looking at bottom of the funnel, a lot of like tweaking and incremental testing being done. So there's a lot of great things that have come out of it. But I find sometimes if you only stay in like the Amazon advertising sphere and super bottom of the funnel, you miss out on these other, like you said, broader views of things when it comes to looking at customer lifetime value. And can I afford, when looking at, again, a longer timeline, could I afford to get more aggressive and be confident that I am going to see a return in profitability? Maybe it's not today, but I can see that, again, if I zoom out over a longer time horizon.
Absolutely. And another thing I was thinking about too was when we're thinking about like widening the scope and thinking about how we're performing like against competition is if you can get access. I know in like the added search query performance different for sellers, like, which is a huge competitive advantage, in my opinion, versus 1P, because you get the impression share, click share, purchase share. I mean, in Vendor Central, you can't see that. So one thing I was thinking about is like click share in general. Just looking at overall click share and where do you sit in terms of where customers are considering your product, I think is really important, because you may be so lower funnel focused and hypnotized by the conversions, which conversion rate to me is like an ultimate metric as well. But what happens when you're not setting yourself up for success to even be considered? And perhaps there's a whole goal oriented to say, hey, look, for this year, our goal is to increase consideration with our media spend. Pause, period. So that's what we're trying to do. I think ultimately that's where sellers and vendors, everyone needs to go, is to start thinking about what can we do with our media. Besides, to your point, when we're only lower funnel focused, there's opportunities that we can see for Amazon being marketing based and not necessarily just a sales converting platform. And based on consumer behavior as well, like more people are researching, like for toys and games, 66% of all searches, whether it happens on Amazon, the conversion or not, they could be buying at Target or Walmart, happens on Amazon. Customers are looking and researching on the platform, not necessarily always buying. You want your brand to be visible and top of mind so you can create that conversion. Ultimately, if you want to get to that goal, you have to start, at the beginning line. And I think everyone wants to just, fast forward to the end. And that's just part of human nature. That's okay. But we need to acknowledge that and figure out a better strategy.
Yeah, so I'd love to maybe give some more clarity to the audience, because I think we've touched on a lot of it as far as like looking at customer lifetime value or looking at total ACoS numbers or things. And there's probably a lot of listeners saying, okay, well, this sounds great. I know I want to build a brand. There's been some massive brands who have built, and a lot of them have exited for numbers that are kind of probably way beyond what they thought they would have when they first started out with one product. So the potential of leveraging Amazon to be able to grow a massive brand is enormous and cannot be understated. But I feel like a lot of sellers are saying, okay, I don't want to just be ROI conscious, or there's this question of, okay, I know if I get less aggressive, I can definitely hurt sales. There's so many sellers understand that dynamic because they've seen it. They pull back on ads and notice their ranking slip, notice it in top line sales. And so then the question is, but I hear a lot of sellers asking, okay, so if I do get more aggressive, am I going to see the return? Where do I see the return? If I hear a lot of uncertainty when it comes to saying, I know I need to do this awareness play. I want to do this awareness play. I want to make sure that I'm not losing out on market share, but I feel this uncertainty black box as I start to get more competitive and see, maybe ROAS go down or maybe even total ACoS numbers increasing. How can I be confident that what I'm doing is effective? I am going to see that long-term return. What numbers are you looking at? How are you evaluating that? And how are you just trying to get clarity into, like you said, that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, the first suggestion I would make is take small incremental steps. Don't just leap into the pond, right? And that's what in the alchemy of the growth, they talk about the staircase to growth and really testing and learning. And that's a big pillar of mine, is testing and learning. Take a part where you want to test. If you want to start to do more sponsor brands, hey, what are the 3 ASINs I really want to maximize the digital shelf and share a voice? And I want to put these in sponsor brand ads, and then I want to do sponsor brand video. What was the click-through rate between the two? What was the conversion? So I mentioned click-through rate and conversion. For me, when I'm thinking about performance, if click-through rate and click are in general, what I'm trying to gauge what customers are interested in. And then in terms of the conversion, I'm looking at conversion rate. And then for new customers, I'm looking at the new to brand sales percentage. And I think that's going to be informing, because one, it'll give you information not only to new customers, but what about returning customers? Because you could see on a particular campaign, are they searching your brand or non-brand? And then what if it's 30% new to brand? Well, that's a returning customer who's just happened to continuously search me out and buy in that manner. So I would say, hey, move up the funnel incrementally, which incremental is a fun word. We toss that around all the time. So take small measured steps up the funnel, I would say. And then understand that the more that we're going up the funnel, there's potential for it to take longer for that conversion. But we don't want our business to be successful just this year. We want to think about how can we be successful in the next 5 to 10. Each time we're starting to move up and we're gaining a wider reach and we're trying to talk to non-buyers, which is going to help pull in that sales growth that we all want, it's going to take a little bit longer. And then if anyone has access to AMC, I think AMC, while there are some still challenges because it's new, what the cool part that I really like about it is looking at the number of exposures and the conversion rate by first and last touch point. So you can actually start to see from a touch point, where's the first place they started and where do I like maximize or optimize my spend mix when I am testing into like sponsor brands or sponsor display, these different ad types where you're saying, all right, I want to get out of sponsor products 80 to 90%. What does that look like? How can I make it less dangerous? How can I make it risk adverse? Where can I minimize risk? And I think using some of the insights to help glean into the test and learn and build it into that framework to say, this is how we're going to do the test, this is how we're going to run it, this is the KPIs we're going to run, and then these are the tools we're going to use to glean insights to figure out, do we want to continue to do it? And if so, how can we optimize it?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And other things you could probably look at, again, if you don't have access to AMC, which is, again, wealth of data. We hear all the time from Amazon, like, oh, it takes X amount of touch points, or that's something it's a general marketing saying because it's true. It's been around for a while. Lots of other ad platforms have tested it. It takes multiple touch points with the clients. But what you're getting with that data is insights into your particular touch points with the client, how they convert, like you said, where they convert. And then also you had mentioned the brand metrics before, which if you don't have, it's not going to give you the exact same data as AMC, like not anywhere near close. But if you don't have access to AMC data, it definitely will give you insights into like your awareness play or considerations or different levels of the funnel that you can, just kind of identify how that is performing for you. And then also if you have access to the search query performance data, that also shows you shopper funnel on specific search pages. So for instance, like, your impressions, click-throughs, add to carts, conversions, all of that. Again, kind of visualizing how am I doing on each levels of the funnel, and then where am I performing really well, where am I seeing you kind of like those end resulted conversions based on the awareness play that I'm running, and then use that to determine where you should or shouldn't allocate budget. Would that be kind of correct?
100%. And the search query performance is so cool because you can get at the term level, at the very term, if you want to even do a campaign with just one term and then you want to measure, like you run an impression share report and you see, did my impression share increase? And then go to the search query performance. And then you can get even down by the ASIN. The search query performance is amazing. It's incredible. Actually, and you can do a lot of damage just by like, hey, we're going to be very tactical and intentful about which particular search terms we want to go against, increase impression share, and then measure, like you said, go in there and look at it, after 2 weeks or 3, whatever the test was, a month, and then see, hey, did that help increase sales? Did it help increase consideration? What do we wanted to go after, and what happened to the business? Because another good learning is like, hey, our goal was to increase clicks, and not only did you increase, but the conversion rate was higher than you expected. And you said, well, why didn't we try this sooner? That's exactly what we need to test. We need to learn. We need to part of this ongoing initiative that we have with our media.
Yeah. How do you all balance this whole testing with, because you definitely still have some sort of profitability targets. Is it looking at the total A cost performance and kind of earmarking certain percentages for testing? Are you looking at it depending on which phase, meaning established product and new product? Maybe we do a little bit more testing on newer products. How do you all balance that, especially on across like such a very large and robust catalog?
Yeah, and this is my philosophy. So going back to that divergent thinking, could versus should, the way I go about it is in 3 horizons, we shouldn't be measuring testing learns at the same way we're thinking about our core business. So in our core business, it should be ROAS focused, right? But as we start to move up the horizons and think about how can we drive future initiatives, the test and learn should just be a test and learn. Now, you can set parameters to say, hey, I really want to get 100% return on this test. I mean, you could do that, but you should be a lot more lenient because then you're going to limit the discovery and findings in the test if you try to constrain it with the same guardrails as you would. So that's how I look at it. But what we try to do when we're testing and learning is being very intentful about what we want to try to accomplish. If it's a success or fail, what went wrong and what can we learn about that in terms of optimizations, or completely no, we tried it, it didn't work. The one thing I'll say though is the difference between a startup and a big business that I've heard mentioned before is that a startup will keep trying until it works. And I know that there's caveat to say some startups are like very risk averse and they don't want to try things because their times are hard and money is tight. I get that. But we just because you do one test and it doesn't work, you can't really use the law of small numbers and generalize everything. Just be cautious. Maybe you want to test it again or give it another particular try, or maybe within that one test you feel pretty confident in the findings where you know where you want to maneuver next and it inspires you to think about things differently. But overall, to kind of summarize, is don't treat those test and learnings with the same constraints as you do with your core ASINs, your core business, and your ROAS.
Yeah, that's an insanely good point. And it sounds like in a lot of ways, determining what tests you should run and where, you almost work backwards from goals. So it's like if goal is to grow this one product line, okay, then we look at the current performance and notice, well, maybe our awareness play isn't as high, or so you kind of determining what are we trying to achieve here, then what tests could we run to try and achieve that, and then based on the results of if we did or didn't achieve goal, that's kind of how you're analyzing those tests. Would that be correct?
Exactly. One clear example was, like, let's say we have a particular ASIN and the goal is to maximize sales growth. Well, we can actually discern after a month, how expensive was it really to achieve sales growth with this? What was the CPC on that? What was the clicks on it, the click-through rate? How did it compare? Do we want to continue to have this strategy move forward in the future? Or yes, we do. And then what was the optimizations from this that we could put in the future to even make this accelerate, but a little bit more efficient because we learned something. So I think there's a lot to learn even when you have a particular goal to analyze the whole business. Like we talked about widening the scope. There's the same Robert Greene. I was reading one of his books now, and the one thing I liked about when he's talking about like detective work is finding out what's not there, what's missing, instead of trying to determine what's there. And that's a good point too that I was thinking about this morning, is really like thinking about the full picture. Even when you have a focused goal with a clear KPI, analyze it and really think about what's beyond the surface of what you could do for the future.
Yeah, that goes back to, like, we've gotten some questions before, like, how many campaigns do you run per product? And we're like, it depends.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, because if you have a main product that's making up a significant portion of the total sales, hundreds of campaigns, easy. And if you have one product that you're kind of on the out with, it's not a super high focus, conversion rates are lower, you might only have one campaign because it doesn't make sense for us to run and do additional tests here. So I agree with you, kind of looking at goals, looking at what is or isn't there that you can achieve the goals, and then based on the difference between those two, kind of evaluating what you should be testing there.
Great summary, exactly.
Yeah, this has been super informative, and I really, really appreciate coming on and having this discussion because, like we said, as things get more competitive, you really have to get more sophisticated and also more long-term in your thinking so you don't miss out, like you said, on what could potentially happen tomorrow because you're so focused on today.
100%. And thank you for having me. You know, I'll look at all your content on LinkedIn. I'm really amazed, honestly, between you and Joe and Michael and Destiny and how you're running a business and able to also provide content that's helping people. Because there's a lot to learn from the insights that you all provide, and I think your clients are very lucky to have you and to be able to have that direct connection impact directly. I appreciate it both as a fan and now as a guest on your show. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Those are some very, very kind words. I definitely appreciate it. And yeah, if you're interested in following David as well on LinkedIn, we'll definitely drop the link to his profile down below. And yeah, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.